Well, thank you all for coming today. I'm Bob Reckman. I'm on the board of the Ward 3 Neighborhood Association, and this is the second of 3 events today. This is going to be about an hour-long tour led by Mr. Steve Strymer, who's an expert in these matters. And you're going to walk, I believe, roughly the proposed new Pomeroy Terrace Historic District.
Roughly, yes.
Which is this side of Bridge Street only. It goes up to about Lampron Park. Then it crosses over Bridge Street, and then it goes down Pomeroy Terrace to the corner with Hancock Street, and it's got a little bit of Phillips Place and Butler Place on it. How did anybody here find out about today's event?
In the paper.
The paper, that's great, that's great.
Association.
Well, I understand that we did a bunch of things. Anybody happen to see it on our website? That's great. And how many of you live in the historic district? Okay, that's great. So the tour should be about an hour. When it's over, it'll end back here, and then we're going to have the Ward 3 Neighborhood Association's spring social event. There'll be beverages and desserts for everybody. And Steve has got a handout here. If you don't have one, you should get one.
And before we go, can we just have one clarification? Because I've heard variant stories and resistance about this idea. This is for a national historic district.
That's right, not a state historic.
Or a local one.
Right.
So this would not impinge on our
That's
ability to paint our houses.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's the concept here. Now, that's as distinct from the Elm Street Historic District. It's not that's my understanding. I was hoping that Sarah LaValle would.
She is supposed to come. She said to me she was going to come.
So Sarah is the point person for the Historical Commission on the Planning Board, and hopefully she'll catch up if we head out before she gets here. Should I?
Well, the other thing I want to say is Steve would be happy to hear stories that you know from houses in the historic district. Look at any artifacts you've got. So I envision this as really a very interactive process, not going to be Steve just leading and talking to you. So if you've got questions, you've got ideas, you've got memories or history, please share them with Steve and with everybody else.
Sound okay? All right. Hello. Hey, how you doing?
Good.
Anybody who doesn't have a packet that wants one, they're up for free up here, courtesy of Collective Copies.
Where do we go?
Right here.
Collective copies.
First come, first served.
We should start by explaining why these buildings survived. Because there was a fire that cleared out the center of town. And it blew that way. And so some of our oldest buildings are down here, including this piece.
There you go. I didn't know that. That's the reason why Pomeroy Terrace survived.
Well, Pomeroy Terrace, yes, actually.
And these houses,
buildings.
and these buildings here.
Yeah.
When was that fire?
Let me, if
the
people
fire
would,
was in
who
the
have
early
packets, it'll
1890s.
help understand what's in here if you're interested. Because this is like homework for you all. Because in a way, we really want to, on the Historic Commission, I kind of work with them on things, and I now work here at Historic Northampton, wanting to develop walking tours of Northampton. We're working this summer. We got a grant from the Mass Foundation for Humanities, our tenant here, to study Underground Railroad and abolition in Northampton with a really fine Free Soil and Liberty Party scholar Bruce Laurie, who wrote Beyond Garrison. And we're studying this summer with an intern, Jen Gray Lewis from the Praxis program at Smith. We'll be studying the Liberty Party Free Soil version of abolition here in downtown Northampton, as distinct from the Garrisonian abolitionists, radical reformers up in Florence. And what we found, and it's very easy, you just scratch the surface, and we're going to scratch some of that Underground Railroad story today in the walk that we take, that there's, just like in Florence, there's undiscovered things everywhere. In Fruit Street, which I find from Bob Reckman, is a part of Ward 3. We're not going down there on Fruit Street, that's where he lives. I live on Clark Ave, and I had no idea that we were that close and not in the same ward. We believe we've discovered the home of a African-American barber who in the 1850 census had a fugitive slave by the name of George Wright living with him. Now we have to get in that house like others, but it shows up on this first map. So let's just quickly go through the packet, just so you know what you have before we start walking. We want to welcome you and hopefully recruit you to become members of your neighborhood museum. You Ward 3 people, really, we would love the support that you could, better than anyone else in Northampton, give the Historic Northampton. The second piece here, this one, is the old Historic District nomination from the 70s with what we're crossing out, and which will form the basis of the new. There's Sarah, she's here, which will form the basis of the new district and nominated houses. The next is a package of maps from 1831 to 1895 showing the development of Pomeroy Terrace and Phillips Place for the large part. And then there's a packet of what we call Form Bs. And these Form Bs are the initial nomination for any historic property that gets filed with the state. They're in the process of being upgraded right now by Bonnie Parsons. The CPA granted $40,000 to the Historical Commission last year to have Bonnie go through the Form Bs and upgrade them, correct them, and add new properties that have been left out. That project is winding down now, correct? Is it done? Dylan? Dylan's here on from the... Sarah, is Bonnie's project done?
It's almost done.
It's almost done. We might be able to get in under the wire, and I have to check one house we're going to see today, Joseph Marsh's house, to make sure she has that Form B, because it's an important one. Here's an enticement to purchase a book. I didn't purposely copy the whole thing. This is our inventory of William Fenno Pratt. If you want the whole thing, you have to buy it inside as part of Paradise Built. But when I copied these first 10 pages, you'll see that all of Pratt's Pomeroy houses are in here before 1866. It was a very early part of his thing. I wanted you to be aware of the Belding silk mills. I also wanted to be aware of the apocryphal stories of the Underground Railroad in this little handout. This came out a while back. Many people in your neighborhood remember Melinda Kennedy. This is a story the Gazette run. And for Underground Railroad scholars, it's a great example of just what you don't want to do, I must say. But at any rate. And then we're going to go by Joseph Marsh's house almost first. Okay? And I want to just explain a little bit about him because he's an underappreciated fellow.
Do we want to just talk for a minute,
Okay.
Steve?
Yeah, any questions right now? And
go ahead, Bob. Go ahead.
No, I'm done. Go.
So I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the limits of the Historic District are still relatively unsettled. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so, Sarah, you can certainly speak to Sarah and Steve about the kinds of houses that are appropriate in these sorts of districts. And you can lobby for your house to be in or for your neighbor's house. It's really a flexible thing. We're trying to get interest in this project, which is a very worthwhile project. So speak to the two people who are knowledgeable here today if you're concerned about things that should be added or deleted.
Just to wet your whistle, and I don't know if Sarah's aware of this particular piece, but Marie, the archivist here at Historic Northampton, dug this up for me at the last minute. We don't have permission to make copies but we hope to get permission, and it's called Picturesque Phillips Place, home of Northampton's industrialists. And it's a really excellent, basically, way of understanding this architecture you're about to see. And she describes basically three types we'll be looking for today. One of the first we'll see is the Gothic Cottage, and then we will see the Italianesque right next to each other on Bridge Street, and then we'll be looking for one of my favorites, and indeed favorites of many architectural historians, the Swiss Cottage. So we'll be looking for at least for those three types today as we head out. Sarah, do you want to say anything before we go?
Basically, well, thank you all for coming. This is a really great turnout. And hopefully it'll be a great thing for the neighborhood. National Register districts don't have, I'm sure a lot of you know, the same restrictions that local historic districts do. So you wouldn't need city approval to change your windows or work on your porch or anything like that. But it's just a really great recognition of the neighborhood's history, which we'll see here.
And if I have my way, we will be leading people on walking tours through your neighborhood, so prepare for that. Keep your gardens tended. I wanted to see if you had that.
Got that?
All right, so
I mowed yesterday.
any other questions before we head out? All right. I think what we'll do this will be a very interesting thing. We're going to pass it on. Okay, I'm going to point this out, and you point it out to the people behind you, because we're going to walk up to the end up here and not try and stop all the time. So I'm going to say something to these people, right? And they're going to say it to the people behind them. We're going to point at this house first.
Oh, yeah.
This is a disputed William Fenno Pratt house, one of the very first. They think maybe his father, Thomas Pratt, was the architect of this. But it's built from a southern, it's in your Form B, so I'm suggesting you go look at it. It's built from a southern plan, okay? But you'll see this kind of style through Pratt's whole history. There's others like this that we'll see. So we're going to head on, and if people up there didn't hear, tell them about it. Early Pratt. This is one of our oldest houses in Northampton, the Parsons House. This Form B is in there, but it's not specifically on this part of the Shepherd House, 1797. We are so lucky to have these houses right in the middle of our town, and they really deserve preservation. We hope to get a grant to finish the painting of this house this summer.
Steve, is the portico original?
What colors are What's that?
The portico in front, is that original?
I'm not sure.
I wanted to ask you a question. I noticed you referred to some of the styles as colonial and some are feather.
Yep.
So was the colonial
This would-
that you used to often refer to as Georgian?
Probably, yeah. I'm not a real great architectural historian. I had hoped that one would come with us.
No, it's not entirely different. I still think it's the days we go.
This is a William Fenno Pratt. It was a parsonage for the First Congregational Church. Because this one's so good, I think I'll come into this parking lot. One of the things I've noticed about William Fenno Pratt, and the man in 1865, the Gazette published his work up until then. They listed it. I think it's in the little piece. It's a treat. In that little 10-pager that I gave you, it's in there, that Gazette article. And it says, and hundreds more designs by William Fenno Pratt all over the valley. We've studied them in Amherst, in Northampton, Florence, Williamsburg. You find them everywhere. This is a colonial that's been Prattized. Okay? And one of those things that show you a Prattized house is the treatment above the window here. And I think even to the point that on the tier just below the very top of the window, the piece is curved, okay, as opposed to square, okay, and you have to wonder, and we know he did work with Moses Breck, a carpenter builder in Northampton, and we wonder, Breck had his workshop up at J.M. Green Hall, and we wonder how much work, where was the woodworking being done? All these questions remain to be answered, and as we study Pratt more, and as this nomination goes forward, let's see here. I'll show you another, so this same house across the street, this is where Daniel Stebbins lived. We're on Bridge Street here. Daniel Stebbins was really the person who started the silk industry in Northampton. If you look in Marjorie Seneschal's book about the century of silk, which is for sale at a Historic Northampton, it's a really great book. She talks about Daniel Stebbins and how he helped educate Whitmarsh, who really exploded the silk industry in Northampton. So this is where Daniel Stebbins, it's another one of these houses that got Prattized. You know, these were colonial houses here. The one next door, this is another Prattized house. All right, so we're heading up the street. and I just want to say a few words here at this humble house.
It's a wonderful.
This one?
I was going to ask you before you start talking. You mentioned it's on the site of the hospital.
Right.
Well, it actually goes back, and I should have made a copy of it. But I haven't. This part of that is a very old house. Okay, so a lot of the original house is still there, and I think there's a Form B for it. Let me say something. If you get your whistles wet by the Form Bs that are in here, they're all available online and available to you as a member of Historic Northampton. You get your password, you can download all of the Form Bs that have been done in Northampton by becoming a member of Historic Northampton for $25. So it's for anybody interested in this stuff, it's well worth doing. Marie keeps uploading stuff all the time. There's always new stuff there.
I thought it was 40.
Well, let's see, it's 20, student, senior, 25, individual, 40. I guess we're mostly individuals. Okay, so this is the home of Joseph Marsh. I put a little handout at the very end, because this is how I learned of Joseph Marsh, was that he wrote the history of the Underground Railroad in Florence. The reason why Joseph Marsh would have been interested in the Underground Railroad in Florence was because he and Seth Hunt, who lived in the beautiful house here we're about to see at 115 Bridge Street, would travel up to Florence to be part of the Free Congregational Society up there, because they were of that ilk of Garrisonian radical reformers that believed in women's rights and all that kind of stuff, you know. And they felt more comfortable in that congregation, so they drove up there every Sunday, back and forth. And Joseph Marsh actually lived in Florence for a while. He was there when David Ruggles had his water cure, and he's one of the people that identified David Ruggles as an Underground Railroad agent while he was here in Northampton, not just his history in New York, but while here. So I tend to trust it because he lived with Thomas Pomeroy, a neighbor up there in Florence. And he was a bookseller. I love that. He was a great bookseller, and this is his humble little house. So I just thought I'd mention that about Joseph Marsh. And so we're walking on. That the Liberty Party and Free Soil Party tended not to want to mix anti-slavery up with any other reform. That was what caused the split of anti-slavery in 1839. Wow, what a crew. This is great.
The wind was blowing that way.
Just put out just before
What year was that?
1891 to 93, I'm not sure. And that's why the center of town was uniform, because they had to build it up. It was all
Oh, but a lot of the buildings are left from 1865. I mean, Smith Charities, all those buildings are still left downtown. So here we are at Seth Hunt's house. I do have a question for people. Does anybody know the history of the white house that's down the street here, this Greek Revival house? Is that yours? Did you know anything about it?
It used to be in the Bridge Street School playground, and it was moved here. It is an absolute gorgeous house, wide floorboards, Dutch ovens. It was the Parsons family home. And the last of the Parsons died about 15, 18 years ago. And the house is filled with antiques, filled with stuff. A shoe that came over on the Mayflower, just unbelievable treasures.
Is Sarah here? Is the district going to extend to that white house, or could we? It is. Okay.
For some reason, the old boundaries.
Okay, good. And what's Mr. Butler's first name? Jerry. Jerry's house is the beautiful bungalow that's here. But we're going to look at one that's almost identical on Pomeroy Terrace, because we're kind of heading that way rather than going up far.
Sears house.
To Sears house. And maybe you can talk about your house when we get to that bungalow. This is the home of Seth Hunt. And Seth Hunt is one of my heroes. He was an abolitionist. He was descended from the original founder, one of the original founders of Northampton. And he worked his way up in the Connecticut River Railroad. And he is everywhere mentioned as a conductor on the Underground Railroad. And we have two of his houses in Northampton. One is the house on Conn Street. It used to be called Maple Street. I believe it's 42 Conns. And that was built in 1845. It's mentioned as a Pratt in its ornament. In other words, it may have been, it doesn't look like a Pratt, but some of the ornament does. This is a thoroughgoing William Fenno Pratt of the Gothic Cottage style. And it's almost better. I realized when we were across the street, you really get an incredible view of these three houses. He took over from Erastus Hopkins as president of the Connecticut River Railroad. He was treasurer for the years Hopkins was there, and both of them are known as conductors on the Underground Railroad. We only recently discovered the Erastus Hopkins house for sure at 101 King Street, and unfortunately, and we hope we can work with the parish at the Catholic parish to preserve the house, but it's slated for demolition. June 7th is when the demolition delay ends. But we're working actively with the parish right now, and they've shown great amount of, because we just found this out a month ago. 1 month ago we discovered that the best documented Underground Railroad house in Northampton, including anything up in Florence, is at 101 King Street, and we're about to lose it. So we'll probably be appealing to people as solutions, but the good news is the parish is working with us. I met with the priest and Father Connors, and we're meeting with the parish council May 31st. So if what's that?
Did you talk to Elise Healy about that?
Some, but I have to talk more with Elise. So at any rate, so by 1859, 1 year before the Civil War, what was the Underground Railroad? I believe more was going on down in the 1845 house than was going on here, but we don't know for sure. The Erastus Hopkins house was built in 1824 and was there throughout that whole period of active Underground Railroad. So any questions here? We have a wonderful, sort of fitting that Seth Hunt's house would have a tall, northern white pines here. You see how high these trees get. And he would go up. What's that?
Why is that fitting?
Why is that fitting? Because he would go to Florence, where the 150-foot tall, old growth northern white pine was that the Utopian community used to gather under. So here it is, Seth Hunt, who every Sunday went up there and he wrote the biography of Charles Burley for the Sheffield History. And so we need to know more about him as a person, but he was a vegetarian, like that.
Question.
Yeah.
There was some rumor that the Underground Railroad would come up the Connecticut River, then take up on the William Street Brook and come over here.
Where is that from? Where is
Just
that
a
story?
local rumor.
Well, we need, we need to try and get document. I want to see if you can find us something on that.
Well, it's just word of mouth, oral tradition that's been passed on for generations.
All right,
I noticed it at some of our meetings.
Yeah. Do you mind if we stop right here? I just talk about is this your house?
Yeah.
You own it?
Yeah.
You love it?
Yes.
Do you know whether it's a William Fenno Pratt house? Do you have an opinion about that?
What is that?
Who the architect was?
No, I don't know.
I just wanted to find out. That had been passed down with the house.
Stick around.
All right. We really do. Okay, so this is an important Italianate house. That was our Gothic cottage. Now, in the Form B for this house, it's not mentioned as a Pratt. In fact, they say that it probably is not a Pratt because it was built in 1875. And his other Italianate houses, like the one that burned down on Pomeroy Terrace, that looked almost exactly like this, were earlier. but I believe it's a Pratt. There's a couple reasons. One, again, look at the windows. See the curve at the top of the window that's on the molding there? And then look at that louver. That's a classic Pratt louver under the eaves. You see that beautiful sculpted form? And they preserved it. It looks like it's a functioning louver there. Sometimes you see them when they've been closed up. So at any rate, and the porch, another telltale Pratt thing is this kind of detail in the columns on a porch at the top. So I would like somebody just to prove it's not a Pratt. But I think this is a lovely house. They've done an incredible job with it. I'll bet you if they would ever let us inside, there would be things inside. We've been in a lot of Pratt houses now, and there would be things you could compare about how we finished out the inside that would be confirmation. So I think we'll be in touch. I don't know about this house. I want somebody who does to talk next.
What's the function of the louver?
To ventilate the attic, to just to keep air moving up there. Can't believe I left this one off the Form B list. You know this house?
Lyman?
I know a little bit about it.
Yeah, because without my Form B, I can't speak about it. So if anybody who's the most knowledgeable can.
I live there.
Okay, go for it.
Built in 1895.
1895.
By a man named Draper, who owned several hotels in town, the Draper Hotel being the most famous. Stayed in the family, I believe, until the 40s. It was a funeral home at one time. It became an apartment building, converted to condos in the 1980s by Paul Britt.
So 1895 by one of the industrialists. That picture, I mean, this is what we're about to embark on, is Phillips Place, Pomeroy Terrace. On your maps, in the early days, it was called, right off the bat, it was called Phillips Place. And this is where, by that wonderful thing we just found, picturesque Northampton, the industrialist, and she makes this great case that one of the things that, and one of the reasons why we have these kind of buildings left around here and developed here, was that people reinvested their money in this town from the get-go. And it's sort of continuing to tradition here. These were locally grown, and if they came in, a lot of them from outside, they lived here the rest of their lives, and they worked together to reinvest in the community. Now, I'm not saying they're all great capitalists or whatever, but at least in terms of the houses we see and what they planned out for themselves and the kind of life they hope to live, which is building on the most beautiful bluff in Northampton, which is there's almost too many trees. You know what I mean? There's almost too many trees. In many ways, I feel like trees just get in the way. I'm just kidding. I know there's probably somebody from the tree committee here just shooting me.
Can I add
But if you know what I mean,
something?
please add something to the house.
I went through that house after the Ahern Funeral Home was sold, and they were turning it into condos. And it was an unbelievable house with a dance floor, a ballroom on the 3rd floor, and wonderful parquet flooring. A very grand house, and it used to have a carriage entrance here, which was taken down when they did the condos, unfortunately. So you could come up in your fancy carriage and get out and never get wet and go to the ball and the party.
I mean, imagine a thing. They did it for the 300th anniversary in Northampton. They did house tours. The owners allowed people into their houses. I mean, just think of it as we inaugurate the historic district. If some of you would be willing to, tidy up and let people in for a day, it could be a great kind of event. I'm just putting that out there. Hello.
Hey, Ellen.
We're actually going to stop and talk about your house because it's so much like Mr. Budger's house. You're too. Do you want to talk about your house?
I have scotch. All right, go.
Who's our resident expert on the arts and crafts and bungalows. Do you want to talk?
Well, this one is very similar to mine. It's a little narrower and shorter, but exactly the same house. I mean, I've been through here when Mrs. Barrows was here, and you could blindfold me and I know exactly where everything is. But my house was 1918, and it's probably fairly similar. And they've got a lot of built-ins. I know we've got window seats, cedar closets, you know, just a lot of things that you wouldn't expect. Very, very well-built houses. It came as a kit, and you had to hire your own carpenter and electrician and plumbers, and they built it and put it together on your lot. Very well-built, great houses. I love mine, and I'm sure you love yours too.
Thank you. Join us if you'd like. But can you imagine being able to walk through houses like this on our tour to see the difference between other houses?
Really pushing that, huh?
Have you ever been tempted to just scrape it all off and get down to the wood that's, you know about the wood?
Well, inside. No, I haven't. I'll show you why sometime. You can come by and look at the inside. Yeah. So I've lived in this house since...
why don't you come up here? And we're going to have to
I'm
come
sorry.
on up and gather and listen carefully.
I can't wait to hear what
Real
they
quiet for projection's sake.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
This is the owner,
My voice
Maria
isn't
Tomas.
very strong, but I've lived here since 1971, and that's part of why I'm devoted to this neighborhood, is because it's been such a wonderful place to live in. When we bought the house was on a lot labeled something, something, lot number, something, something. And I've been told that this was the first subdivision of America. This was farmland, and they cut it up into lots. And then built that house first. My house was second, and I'm not sure what the other lots were. And they built them apparently on spec. I know it says it was built for Edgar Crooks. But I've been told that it was built on spec, and they sold it because somebody in the city, some planner, made the decision to develop this as a residential area, and hence these house lots. And we're only the third family that's ever lived here, and so it's a very lovingly cared for house. It's never been sort of massively taken apart. The architect was a lay architect, and what's interesting is he has a fabulous sense of interior space, exterior mass. And you can't tell it from the outside, but one of his principles of design was to have windows in every room that faced in two directions. And the sighting of the house is unbelievable. There's a bay window over there. And after summer solstice, the sun rises in the northeast window and sets in the southwest window. So every window has sun in it, at least one day here, except for the one that faces straight out that way, due north. So it's amazing, and every room apparently had a different exotic wood, but that got painted over when Morris Crooks inherited the house from his father and did some revisions.
When was it built?
It was built in 1886, and
And the architect was C.H. Jones, who we need to know more about. There's a number of Jones buildings downtown.
yeah.
He with Pratt and E.C. Gardner were our three principal architects in Northampton.
And you have
I did want to say one thing. In the very last couple pages, I put in this little piece here about the Belding Mills. Mr. Crooks was the superintendent of the Belding Mills, which were the largest silk. You know, you think of the Nantucket Silk Company as being big, but really Belding was even bigger. And the factory sat down at the end of Hancock, at the corner of Hancock and Hawley Street. And there's a picture of the old mill there. And so this was one of the superintendents of that mill, living right near his factory.
And this little room down here was his home office. And on damp days, you can still smell the cigars.
We almost lost a lot of these houses, Maria.
About the fire?
Yeah,
No.
no,
The interstate.
91.
91.
What
They
91
wanted to
was
put
supposed to.
91 real close to here, and almost all of these houses went. The neighborhood had to be
And it was
battled.
Melinda Kennedy who
Melinda.
was central to in this neighborhood.
Rise up, neighbors. Would you like to speak a little bit about your house, because it's not in the Form D? Chris. I thought you said you lived at 37.
I grew up in that.
You grew up in that house. Wow. And the owner's here too?
Yeah, I don't know anything.
You don't know anything?
No, other than what the maps have told
Well,
me.
maybe he doesn't, the new current owner doesn't know anything.
I'm forgetting everything, so. It's me, I'd like to see. Now, I grew up, my dad bought that, I think in the late 30s. They lived on Bixby Court down in Hawley Street. It's now all condos. And he moved up here to this house. And he lived there until he died back in the 90s, and his wife had it until, when did you buy it? 01, yes. And so they had it for some time. And I understand, I was talking to the woman that owned the house over here, that my dad used to say that when they got into parts of that house, they was tearing it apart years ago, and he found wood in there that said Belding from the mill. Because it was somebody was in that house originally that was in your house. And we knew Crook, the supervisor, so he may have had a hand in it.
And to look at it as distinct from Pratt houses, we're going to see more Pratt houses shortly. See how different the windows are on this one. It's not, so sometimes I wish a house would be a Pratt, but talk about your house. It's your house. How about your house, please?
Well, we know it was built in 1885. We know that there's probably been, 6 or 7, we saw a historic record, it had 6 or 7 owners, I think, not a tremendous number. We recently painted it in the past couple of years it was all white with black shutters. And we painted it gray to bring out the trim a little bit more because it has such beautiful details.
It is.
Most of the wood inside is intact, never been painted. So the original color and, which is kind of a burnished orange after so many years, it's just beautiful.
Okay, so it was a rectory for St. John's Episcopal. And St. John's, people should remember, it's in your little Pratt, the 10-page Pratt thing, is where the liquor store is now. And K&H, right? That's where the Episcopal, where the A&P was. I think they tore down the church to make the old A&P. So that area, that's where believe that's St. John's, and there's a picture of it. It was a Pratt, and it's in your booklet there. What's that? The synagogue was the old Episcopal church. The Jewish community took over from that.
My house is the one that used to be, that they moved my house to put the church there. My house was built in 1785 and they moved
Where's your house?
To Cherry Street.
Oh, you're the
Yeah, I'm the really awful looking green house on Cherry Street.
I want to know more about that.
I used to,
If anybody wants to take on a research project, I believe I used to know the owner here. I don't know who owns it now.
Paul Schul.
Paul Schul, a photographer.
Yes.
Yes, Paul. Well, he'd be a great person to talk to about. It's reputed to be a Pratt, but I kind of don't believe it is. So it would be a nice one to disprove if we could, or prove. There's Pratt-like brackets. We'll see the brackets on the edge there, and the brackets hold up the eaves. See up at the eaves. There's the it's the overhang. All right. As you go by, look at the brackets there, and then you'll
know a little bit about this.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. This was originally the carriage house of this house, and the properties were divided, and then this was built into a larger structure. And during Prohibition, this was a speakeasy. And after something would be shown at the Academy, everybody would come down here for liquor and dancing. And Paul and I bought the meadow together back in 2001. He got 3 acres in the house. I got basically the rest of the meadow. And so I've been in there before Paul redid it, and it was a fabulous dance floor. And then you could come out, there's a little balcony right there. You could come out, of course, if you got warm or whatever.
Fantastic.
And this is part of why our end of town was the wrong side of the track for Smith students. And they weren't
Let me
allowed
tell you
down
something,
here.
nothing's changed. There's still plenty of booze here.
Probably more than we can do, and you'll have to be the judge about going back for your party. I could do this for a while. We don't get many opportunities to do this. So this is the French house. I have this great, I'll put it out here because it gives you an idea of just how highly these folks thought of themselves. This is from the centennial edition of the Northampton, the Hampshire County Journal, and many of these men here have pictures of themselves. And here's these are great to find out about some of your people, just little snippets about it. French is one of them that's in here, and this was we don't think it was built by Pratt, but it was remodeled by Pratt, and he kind of went hog wild. Another Pratt signature is that little window up above, the round window, putting that piece over the top. This, the building, what's that?
One on the porch or?
Behind the tree, you can't quite see it from where you are. You'll see how windows like that around Northampton. So at any rate, I haven't really studied up today on the industrialists, the details of their lives. Does anybody want to say anything about French? Next door, I have much more to say about this house. Fred was mentioning the apocryphal stories of the Underground Railroad, and this is certainly one of the best apocryphal stories in this house. In other words, the story about this house, hello Roger, is that you would hang a light in the cupola of this house when it was safe to move fugitives down this way, right? I've never seen any substantiation for that ever. And the other stories, and in the last page of your document, this is what Bruce and I are hoping to deal with. If people see, this is Melinda Kennedy, a saint of the neighborhood, and she lived, I believe, in this house, right? 44. And if you read this article, you can see why Underground Railroad historians would cringe at articles being written like this. You would go out of your way to try and not have this go, because 2/3 of the houses they mentioned down here are either not Underground Railroad, at least not substantiated, and some of them are just dead wrong. They're not even in the right place. There's stories of tunnels connecting all these as evidence that they were Underground Railroad, that there's a system of tunnels under here.
That's right.
I'm not saying it's not true, right, that there's tunnels, but we don't know. You never know whether a tunnel you find is Underground Railroad. So all I'm saying is, okay, we have to be careful. It's a new time for Underground Railroad studies. It's a sort of rigorous, trying to get a rigorous understanding of what it really was. And that's what our project at Historic Northampton is about. This house, though, and it's on the Form B, didn't belong to Rufus Ellis, but he rented here. And he was the minister at the Unitarian Society, and he spoke at the 1850 meeting called by Northampton at City Hall by 10 fugitive slaves, and Rufus Ellis, as a white person, was chosen to be one of the people that spoke. And so I'm wondering whether that apocryphal story doesn't filter down to the fact that this is where Rufus Ellis, a known anti-slavery abolitionist, lived for 10 years here in Northampton. So these stories, and the reason why I'm saying to Fred, any little story of the Underground Railroad is something we want to know about, and then you just pick at it and try and get at why that story's there and what evidence we can find.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Coming back to this house here.
Yeah.
There's a very influential French family in Amherst. I'm wondering if there's any relation.
I couldn't tell you.
But one thing, Steve, is that June here lives in the house two down.
Yeah.
And also has traditions, oral traditions, saying her house was on the Underground Railway.
Yeah.
Connected with Melinda's and this other house.
to mine, Woodruff House.
It'd be wonderful if there was some way to prove it, but how could
Well, we will be working on it.
Yeah.
We will be working on it. And I believe, we need to go up this way a bit and then come down here, right? Because we have to see this house, you know. But I want to talk about June's house when we get there.
Henry James connection to the street.
Oh, yeah.
There's a Henry James connection to Northampton.
Doesn't he mention the street in his first novel?
I don't know. Maria would probably know about that. All right, so, you know, like many of the tours, you could do this in 2 or 3 tours, you know. And a big decision for us right now is whether we're going to go all the way up to Roger Saloom's house. Roger's here, which would be nice to have him talk about it. He got a preservation award on his house not long ago. I encourage you all to preserve your house and get preservation awards. This is maybe my favorite Pratt. One of my top 5, I think. I love it, but I think it's the Gaylord Cottage, is that right? On the Form B? And Gaylord was another industrialist that came here. In this paper that Sarah has, it is featured in this paper. So look for it. I'm going to try and find the student who wrote the paper and get the rights to bring it out as a monograph series with photos on Pomeroy Terrace, because it's really worth doing that for. And Gaylord was an outsider, came to town, had a lot of money, and invested in the banks and reinvested and built this beautiful cottage. There used to be one like it up on Paradise Road, which sadly, I believe it's in your little Pratt thing, that it's gone, but this one is here, and look at the brackets. I mean, I'm going to show you a little treat I brought. This is the book I want you all to buy, of course. Right? It's called Paradise Built. It's a wonderful book brought out at the 350th. But I bought this when I was on vacation once, and this is Downing's cottage residences. And you can look in here and see where these kind of buildings came from, because Pratt was not known as an original mind as an architect, though there's several very original houses, very creatively built out houses here. And this is the classic Swiss cottage from this book from 1844. So Pomeroy Terrace was laid out in 1847. I think this one is 1851. I think June's house is one of the very earliest, and I'm going to make the case when we go by June's house that perhaps her house is the earliest Pratt around. And it's not recognized as a Pratt either, but we're going to look at it with Pratt eyes and see if you can't see what I see. Next up is Osman Baker's house. It's built on the same pattern as that Butler house we saw across the street from Historic Northampton. And he was a huge industrialist here in town and banker and state representative, and I think he was even a U.S. representative, I'm not sure. Big money along this street.
Which house are you talking about?
The Children and Family Services. What is that building?
Yeah.
The brown one with the
No, the stucco house.
Hutchins program.
Hutchins program house. One of the saddest things was a Pratt that was lost, the Lawrence house, and it is featured in this. If you want to know about the Lawrence house, it looks very much like the Italianate house that we saw up the street. The Lawrence house was this house here, and it burned down not in the 80s, or 80s or early 90s.
And where was it?
And it was where the small little condos are right there. Very sad. And it's Pratt to the nth degree. And it's almost, if you want to go see it, it's the Dickinson House, the Evergreens in Amherst. Was built almost the same time, right next to Emily Dickinson's house. If you want to see what that house looked like, this is basically what it looked like. What's that?
Judge O'Brien who had that house built?
I don't think so. It's in the Form Bs, if you want to look and see who had it built. The man's name was Lawrence, and then I think a Belding actually owned it. I think, we were talking about the Beldings. I think he owned it. We're at this house, and I just wanted to, while we have her here, and I want to embarrass her a little bit, because it's fun to embarrass people. Where'd my book go? There it is. Lou Stone wrote this book for our 350th series about her house on Summer Street. And if you ever want to see a book about what it means to dig into the history of your house and what you can come up with, here is the book. Right? And I just thought, and what it is, it's sort of like, not 6 degrees of separation, but it's taking this person and what they did and that. She had a gold medal winning swimmer family, Olympic swimmer live in that house. But she also, Lou Warner she writes about, and this is the house of Lewis Warner, right?
He was the main character.
Long a popular figure in the area's political circles, Lewis Warner ran for state treasurer in 1886 and lost. The defeat, however, was probably for the best. 1 year later, upon the death of Luther Bodman, Warner was appointed president of Hampshire County National Bank, retaining his post at the Hampshire Savings Bank. And then it goes on. Lou, could you tell the rest of the story?
It turns out he was really a philanthropist and a banker and highly respected, and it turned out he was an embezzler. He was caught, he fled town. It took a while, but he was caught in Kentucky. He was hauled back, tried, and ended up in Charleston State Prison. It was a huge story. The New York Times covered it.
That's the fellow that had this house. So it's up to you
He got out.
about whether this is part of our problem. And the district is going to go all the way up to Roger's house. Is that right, Sarah?
Yes.
And is that where it ends?
If not there, then very
Just beyond? And it'll include a few houses on Butler Street and a few houses on Hancock. Is that right?
Yeah.
It's 2 o'clock.
It's too far. I think, Roger, I know. I mean, people know it. It's a gorgeous house. Do you know who the architect was?
No.
It's not listed.
Oh.
And if you look at it, it's not listed as a Pratt, and I agree. Even though it has Pratt-like features, I don't think it is a William Fenno Pratt. It's more like an early C.H. Jones, but I'm not going to, so we'll see.
The one thing we had heard is it was the home of the first mayor of Northampton, Benjamin Cook.
Ah.
And which house is it?
It's
All the way at the end of the street on the right, just before it
Where the turn
before
is?
it turns.
With the dogs? The dogs, yeah. Are they dogs? I thought they were lions. Oh, the lions? No, they have dogs and they have a little horse.
I think it's a Pratt.
Live dog.
Is it the gray one? There's a house on Hancock, I think it's a Pratt. I mean, you look at those walls, look at all those elements. And,
You want this now, or do you want
there's a Form B on your house. Is that right? Do you know that? I believe there is. 14 Hancock. I'm almost certain there is. Okay. Well, do you want to talk about your house for starters? Huh? I'll go first. In Lou's book, she also mentions this house, the home of C.M. Kinney. And you have to look in more to what C.M. Kinney was about. Maybe Lou knows and can speak about it. But one reason why I think it might be a Pratt laid this out. The second map in your map collection is his plan for Phillips Place. And one of the few houses that are scribbled in with an actual tenant that by the time those plans, or at some stage they scribbled in, is C.M. Kinney. And C.M. Kinney, do people know Keith Wilbur's house on Prospect Street?
Yeah.
That's where they moved to. They built that house, from this house, they built that house up there, and that was a Pratt. And Pratt laid this out, and this was one of the very earliest houses in the neighborhood. So I'm wondering how it couldn't be a Pratt, but if you look at the windows, those are squared off a little bit. There's not many hipped roofs, but there's many double chimneys, and the style of chimneys is similar. And so it's one that maybe you'd let us in sometime, we could look at the woodwork, you know. But it would be very early, about the time Pratt built City Hall. Again, if you want to look at his whole oeuvre, you know, the timing of things is pretty interesting. This is another Pratt across the street. See the louver on that house? That's another Pratt louver, and those brackets are another Pratt style of brackets up at the roof line, and the windows are classic Pratt, and this is the Watson Smith house. It's also got its Form B in there. This house is in your packet, associated with this house. It was an outbuilding for this house, which is the only Greek Revival house on the street, though it's a later one, probably a very early house here, but that was an outbuilding for that house.
Kinney was a cemetery, made marble markers, and his son took over the business and bought the Summer Street house. And now I live next door to the house that the son moved to after he sold.
Up on North Street.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You lost.
Do you want?
I was just going to ask you a question. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I don't know that much about it. My sister looked it up, and she said that there is something at Forbes Library which shows that there were two separate parts to the house, and that the older part is the part in back, and the earlier part is the part in front. But I've never seen that. And she said it was something called the Phillips Farm. Is that true?
I don't know.
I don't know either. But Lou's looked up the house and knows more about it than I do.
Right?
Yep.
This
Go ahead.
house.
No, I don't know
Kinney.
much about this house.
Go ahead, Fred. Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, you know about
This
Kinney.
was all a farm, and the farmhouse was on Hawley, and then, you know, all of these houses, it's not an even, the lots aren't even, like some of the Phillips Place houses have a double lot in the back, and the ones on Butler have only one lot, you know, and that this whole, from Hawley to Pomeroy was a single farm.
I don't know about that myself.
Yeah.
And also that Melinda said that there was a connection with the Underground Railroad, but nobody substantiated that.
Fred?
The last house on the left on Pomeroy Terrace, the McCutcheon Place, what style is that?
That would be Italianate too, I think.
Okay.
But
And
that was Osman Baker.
that's the Baker house.
Yeah, and there's a Form B on it in there.
Is that related?
It's actually a 3-page Form B on that house.
Is that related to Augie?
That
Augie's
house stylistically is, yes. And it's detailed in that Form B.
And does it come from the south along with?
Yeah, it's by the same set of plans.
Same set of plans.
Yep. All right, so I guess, what's the easiest way to get back home? We'll do one more Pratt and then we'll head back, I guess. We've got this Pratt here on Phillips Place. All of these are in your Form B. I just wanted to get the this one isn't. Oh, that's Butler. Okay, they don't have it. Yes, it is 37 Phillips Place, 1853. Makes it a fairly early Pratt. And if you go up on Monroe Street, I would suggest if you want to see more Pratts, go to after looking at this one, go to Monroe Street. There's a matched pair like this on Monroe Street, both of them William Fenno Pratts. So
Next door to each other, or?
Next door to each other. Yeah.
You think those?
And then this is one of this very special William Fenno Pratts, and Fay Wolf lives there. And again, as a treat and an enticement for you to go order or buy this book, she wrote the building, a wonderful thing. There was a quote late in his life about him plying the plane and pencil, and this is what she named her 3-part piece on William Fenno Pratt. So if you want to know about Pratt, she's the one to read, and she lives in a Pratt and writes a very charming thing, not unlike Lou's.
And there she is.
There she is. Hey! Yeah, right. So we'll just let ourselves in. Yeah. I'm giving him a pitch for your work. This is the author of that piece.
looking at you.
Showing us all the.
And this is another example of a Swiss cottage, they call it, like the one down there. And this was Dr. Meakin's house, is that right? Dr. Meakin's house. And it's got a, she tells the story of the interior of this house. And Pratt, you know, he was good, but Fay writes a really beautiful piece on sort of his inexactitude that she finds very charming, you know. Because he was, after all, he was a son of Thomas Pratt, a homegrown builder. He wasn't a fancy architect with a lot of schooling, and he was a carpenter builder. His brother was a builder too. And so who knows how fast, his father, Thomas Pratt, who knows how fast he put it up. You don't know? But you still love it, right?
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
Very good.
It needs feeding. The gardens all need feeding.
And here's the place, the polka dots. Where do those come from, you know? I think that could be Pratt. I think he was playful in certain ways, and this one certainly shows it. It could have come from Meakin's, for all we know, right?
There's a building in Florence, Italy, that has these sort of medallions on it. Really famous buildings, and I've always wondered if someone's picture
Yeah.
how well he used.
We've been really fortunate that a whole bunch of owners have just walked out when we walked by. It's been like this very close thing.
You know?
Yeah, people are coming out.
It's the neighborhood watch. We're suspicious characters.
All right, so we're just heading on back.